I call to order this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District Governing Board. Today is Tuesday, February 8th, and it is 6 p.m. Vice President Dr. Hartwells, can you please lead us in a Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to start with a roll call vote, starting from my far right.
Zach Lindsay.
Jan Michael Greenberg.
Patty Beckman. Libby Hartwells.
Julie Sanowski. All members are present. We do have a quorum. Do any of our governing board members have input or changes, amendments they'd like to make to our agenda for this evening? No, seeing none, I ask for a motion to approve our agenda as presented.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Dr. Hartwells moves, and Board Member Greenberg provides a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We have a 5-0 approval. And we will start off our meeting with a very special presentation. I'd like to turn this over to Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Sanowski and members of the Governing Board. Tonight we have a special presentation from our 3 student MCs at the Voices event this year. I'd like to invite Principal Oxinger up to introduce our students. We're looking forward to having a conversation with them about what went well, what they would recommend that we can improve for the future, and any other things that they would like to share from that event.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam President, Vice President, Governing Board members, Dr. Menzel and Gladys. Thank you so much for having us here today. We do have our 3 MCs from our 22nd annual Youth Voices event. They are here tonight to go ahead and provide their speeches with you. And then they're going to go ahead and just give a few notes about student voice. All right, so thank you so much for having us here today. And would the 3 of you like to go ahead and come up? Yeah, we'll go ahead and you can just stand right here and then go in a little bit. So first is Ivan Martin. Yep.
First off, good evening, President Sanowski, Vice President Hartwells, board members, Dr. Menzel, and Gladys. Thank you for your time today. I'm going to start off by saying my speech. It's called Being Black in America, but I'd like to start off with a little poem by Langston Hughes called I Too. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody dare say to me, eat in the kitchen. Then, besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am American. It is no secret that in the United States today, being black is a social struggle. Despite her short history, our country has not made it easy for black people to forcing their ancestors to endure countless hardships. Forcing the blood, sweat, and tears from my people and those like them who helped build this country. Those same hardships, those tears, that sweat, and the blood are so perfectly captured in Langston Hughes' I Too, for his cry for protest against American racism. Drawing attention in the way black people were relegated to the kitchen or the back of the bus because of their skin color. Denying certain citizens freedoms, the same freedoms which our country is so proud, simply because we are black. I Too was published in 1925, nearly 100 years ago. But the ideas still resonate today. Do I not deserve equality because I am the darker skin? Am I not worthy of my country's freedoms even though my ancestors were enslaved? Being black in America means you have to persevere. Persevere through the slick comments and smart remarks. Persevere through the injustice and segregation and racism by developing our own vibrant, beautiful, and independent cultural traditions. My story of perseverance started when I was 9, when I moved to Arizona from South Florida. In South Florida, I was surrounded by people who looked like me, and coming to Arizona was a culture shock. My first day in middle school, I remember the stares I would get as I would walk from class to class. Talking to fellow classmates was hard, as they would try to be funny by making some remarks about my skin color or how I had some physical advantage over them for being black. My peers would often touch my hair, and when I got upset, they would often tell me to stop acting black. I didn't even know what acting black meant, but I sure hated it when they said it to me. I was the only black kid over the age of 10, and being the only black kid in school made me feel like I was a rare animal. Any racial questions was asked of me. I was only expected to be good at sports, and if I knew something that they didn't academic-wise, they would look at me and be confused, as if I was less than them. Every day, I felt less of a person, as if I shouldn't be able to do what my white peers could. I would cry to my mom and try to convince her to let me transfer out of the school, but every time she would tell me to persevere. She would tell me that I am strong and not to let them have power over me. She would remind me the great black leaders that had to persevere to face adversity throughout history and how I can decide my own history. Black history is American history. And I am proud that I am black, but being black is not all that I am. And that was my speech. Thank you, guys. Now I want to talk about my experience going to the MLK. To stand and tell your story in front of hundreds of people is nerve-wracking. I'm so thankful for Ms. A, Ms. Highland, and Ms. Holmberg because without them, I wouldn't be able to be where I am today and tell my story. I'm so grateful to hear Ms. McLeod's powerful speech for the first time. Even at the dinner, I met a rabbi, and we talked about how living in the Dakotas is going to be cold, and he was trying to prepare me for when I go up to college. Next, I want to talk about giving students a voice. Everyone has a story. It could be about anything, but no two people have the same story. I believe it is important that we have the chance to share our stories to understand and celebrate our differences. Having a voice made me feel strong. I felt proud to stand up there on the podium and represent the African American community by sharing my voice. And last but not least, I want to thank you guys. I want to thank the board members for this great experience to be at this board meeting today. I want to thank Dr. Menzel and Gladys. And I want to thank everybody for listening to my story today. Thank you.
Good evening, President Sanowski, Vice President Hartwells, board members, Dr. Menzel, and Gladys. Thank you for your time tonight. It was an incredible experience to be able to give my speech at the 22nd Annual MLK Youth Voices event, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to give it again. Both of my parents are first-generation immigrants in the United States, and I am their first child, their oldest daughter. My world is built on extraordinary contradictions, innumerable barriers, and towering expectations, all of which are held together by one thing: hope for a better future. For as long as I can remember, my parents have pushed me to excel in everything I do, and failure has not been an option. For as long as I can remember, their dream has been for me to be a doctor or an engineer, and slowly their dream somehow became mine. For as long as I can remember, I have watched my parents sacrifice everything to give me every possible opportunity to play by a system that neither of us understand. And for as long as I can remember, there has been no backup plan, no nearby relatives to fall back on, no extra source of money in case I don't get a scholarship, no other way to make my family proud. For as long as I can remember, I have watched my parents struggle to reconcile their worldviews to the ones around them, including my own. For as long as I can remember, I have had the same experience. I grew up feeling ashamed of my parents' culture, my parents' food, their language, and their opinions. And I grew up feeling ashamed of my own culture, my food, my language, and my thoughts and ideas. It was no one's fault how out of place I felt, but at the young age of 5, How was I supposed to know that just because no one else brought rice and dal to school for lunch, it didn't mean that there was something wrong with me? How could I know that speaking to my family in my mother tongue while the rest of my peers spoke to theirs in English was fine, that it was a beautiful gift I had and not an embarrassment? I didn't know. Even now, I'm not sure if I have fully figured out how to juggle two cultures, both of which come with different expectations and norms, while not losing myself in the process. The importance of diversity cannot be overstated. What we have today, it's not enough. Diversity must be intentional because it's not enough to merely have people of different backgrounds present. Their voices must be amplified and encouraged and their messages heard and echoed. In today's world, it's not enough to be colorblind when too many people see color as an indicator of worth and ability. It's not enough to stop seeing someone's gender when too many people see gender in its archaic confines as either a weakness or a strength. America is a country filled with diversity and differences, and it is what makes us beautiful. We have to see that and recognize it. Centuries of rallies, marches, protests, and wars have gotten us here, but where exactly is here? Hate crimes still happen. Violence towards women is a dangerous reality for many. This is where we are today, and we are here because it seems to be in human nature to breed pain and suffering. But look around. It is also in human nature to create and build beautiful things, art that is unique to individuals and cultures. There is hope. Racism, sexism, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, these aren't problems that diversity alone can solve. The solution is to make our approach to diversity consistent, pervasive, determined, and persistent. Dr. Martin Luther King stated, "Change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle." Diversity itself is a goal to keep in mind, but even more important is the creation of a safe environment for people of diverse backgrounds to speak in. What if there was a place for every single person to be uniquely, purposefully, and unapologetically themselves? Diversity is recognizing and emphasizing our value, empowering each other, and only once this happens can equality come into full effect. Dr. King once stated, "We must accept finite disappointment but never lose infinite hope." There is no easy solution to the problems we are faced with, but how can we stop now? I am here today because of hope. I will continue to hope for a better future and do whatever is in my power to ensure that that happens. Thank you. Now, as Ivan did, I would like to speak on my experiences, both at the 22nd Annual MLK event as well as just in general. So, at first, this opportunity was something that I glanced at but did not really consider, because to talk about my personal experiences and doubts in front of my entire school was an intimidating idea, to say the least. And when I was starting, I had no idea what to say. I rewrote draft after draft, finally settling on one that I found half decent. And then the night I submitted my speech, I discarded the whole thing and rewrote it from scratch to create the speech that you just heard. So everything I said was completely honest, and one of the most incredible parts for me personally was the reaction students at my school had to my speech. People would come up to me and congratulate me, and on top of that, they would thank me for what I said. I hadn't realized at that point that my words could resonate with anyone as much as they did, or that my own experience, even the most personal aspects, were shared by so many. In a way, this opportunity brought me a lot closer to my peers, which is something I will be forever grateful for. In terms of encouraging students to speak up and share their own experiences, something else that I noticed at the MLK Youth Voices event at Saguaro was how students were affected by the guest speaker, Patricia Russell McLeod. I personally was left speechless after seeing her present at the annual CCD event, and again after her speech at Saguaro. So for me, the impact of her identity as a woman of color, combined with the strength of her speech, made her someone to look up to as a role model. And I know that was shared by so many girls and people of color present that day. And I think seeing people like yourself speaking with such power can be profoundly inspiring. And I personally feel that if we were able to provide students with more opportunities to see people like themselves and what they have become and accomplished, it would encourage us to use our own voices. Again, I would like to thank you all, President Sanowski, Vice President Hartwells, board members, Dr. Menzel and Gladys. I'm so grateful to have been given these opportunities, and I appreciate the chance to share my thoughts with you all. Thank you.
Good evening, President Sanowski, Vice President Hartwells, board members, Dr. Menzel and Gladys. Thank you for your time tonight. It was an honor and a privilege for me to speak at the 22nd Annual MLK Youth Voice event, as I was inspired by my peers and by the guest speaker. I also found a welcoming community that I never knew, and I found others that have also shared similar journeys. I'm going to read my speech to you now. Undoubtedly, the single hardest day of my life was the day that I was forced out of my home. At the age of 7, my home country, Syria, broke into a civil war. I was placed into situations that some people will never understand, traumatizing experiences that would haunt me through my dreams. The stories and events that took place in my debilitated country would need an abundance of ink and paper for me to describe. After 2 years of torture and being under siege, we were able to escape. Unfortunately, my 13-year-old brother was sniped by an explosive bullet that left him critically wounded. My family and I left everything behind and followed my brother in an ambulance to Turkey in order to save his life. Since he was severely hurt as the bullet did not exit but detonated in his upper chest, this caused the evaporation of blood vessels and nerves that left his right arm impaired. We went on a journey to find my brother the medical attention and intensive care that he so desperately needed, while also trying to find a safe place for us all. I was very frightened and confused. No words could describe how I was feeling at that time. I've never seen my family in such a miserable situation. I became a refugee in foreign countries, far away from my community, where I once felt safe and protected. Migration was never a term in my vocabulary. On that day, I felt like I became an adult, but way too early for my age. I needed to help my family go through the devastating circumstances that we were bound to face. Many of my beliefs, hopes, and ambitions were destroyed, just like my city, into rubble and dust. However, with time, I realized that my uniqueness was my greatest strength. The only way I could embrace my story was to share my voice. I faced enormous challenges with fitting in, such as new languages, cultures, and finding a sense of belonging. But I always had one goal in my mind. I needed to strive and take advantage of this opportunity. Fortunately, I was lucky enough to escape the war and become a citizen of this diverse and promising country. My experience taught me that meeting new individuals from different backgrounds not only makes you appreciate their journeys, but also makes you appreciate your own journey and be humble and thankful for it. Diversity brings the best version of you. Not only will you grow closer to your roots, but you will start to embrace them. Since coming to the U.S., I learned to speak English in the first 6 months, and I found my own ways to express myself. All these drawbacks in my life have shaped my personality to be more empathetic, courageous, and curious. I believe my experience as an exile and a foreigner did not set me back, but instead added fuel to my intense desire to help others in overcoming their fears. I want to motivate others to share their uniqueness, as it is what makes us stronger as individuals and as a nation. I want to thank Ms. A for providing this opportunity and Ms. Holmberg for helping me through my essay. And not only was I inspired, also my peers were inspired, and I was very shocked that my Spanish teacher came up to me and he told me that he shared similar experiences as he also came as a refugee. And he told me that it was really hard for him to fit in, and even though he's older than me, he said he learned a lot from me, and that really made me happy and truly showed me the difference that sharing your voice can make. And thank you all for providing this opportunity.
If you can come up, there may be some questions too, but we do have a presentation here.
So it is tradition that that our district provides challenge coins to special people who present and do things special in our district. And the three of you not only deserve these challenge coins for the challenges that you have overcome and continue to, but also I'm going to call these courage coins, and I want you to, for you to think about these and take these with you wherever your future leads you, and understand that by sharing your stories, you provide strength and hope for others. So I would like to present these to you this evening on our behalf. Thank you, guys. You are the reason that so many teachers and staff members dedicate every day of the school year, and then some, to being better. So thank you. Appreciate it. Questions? Board Member Beckman.
I don't really have a question, other than, was it harder saying your speeches or your stories tonight or in front of your peers?
I say, we all say tonight, basically.
Really?
Like, yeah, when we're talking in front of like our school, we're used to being in that atmosphere.
Yeah.
But coming here, I've never been to Mojave inside like the campus. And coming here and seeing you guys just staring at me talking, it's a little nerve-wracking.
Well, I wanted to thank you. I've gone to Voices for a couple of years now, and every time I leave that presentation, I'm humbled and I'm awestruck by our students. And I wanted to thank you on behalf of my own daughters who attend Saguaro and listen to your stories, and let you know that not only am I happy that you are here and grateful, but they are better people from hearing your stories and being your fellow students. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from board members? Any other questions? Dr. Hartwells?
This is not a question. I want to thank you for sharing your story, and making yourself vulnerable to others is very difficult, but we are better for it, and I could not agree more that our diversity is our greatest strength. So thank you for being here tonight. I think you all did a fabulous job, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you for having us tonight.
Thank you. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
your time. We appreciate your families for being here, but we also know you probably have other things to do, so you don't have to stay for the rest of the meeting.
Thank you guys for having us once again.
Take care, and thank you again. And thank you to the teachers who supported the Voices and the administration, and also provided these opportunities for our students in our district. Now we move on to Section 4 of our governing board meeting, information discussion items, and I turn this over to Dr. Menzel to introduce our presentations tonight.
Thank you, President Sanowski. As you know, we have regular scheduled updates from our three associations, the Scottsdale Administrators Association, Scottsdale Education Association, and the Scottsdale Support Staff Professional Association. And I would like to invite, I believe all four are going to come up at the same time. So we'll do that as we have before. As you know, we've got a theme, Better Together, and so they'll provide their update this evening.
Drawing that short stick. Good evening. Good evening, President Sanowski, Vice President Dr. Hartwells, board members, and Superintendent Dr. Menzel, and always Gladys. So we were asked to share some positives and what we can do better. So specifically with the SSPA, our positives are with each survey, we are getting more and more responses with new memberships, and all from the meetings that we hold. I'm honored to be doing the work for the SSPA and with all education support professionals, because we are just as important as each person in this room, in the cloud, or at home watching. To be able to announce that our membership is still attracting more and more of our 1,300 plus employees is evidence that our work has been needed all along. Classified workers are starting to feel more valued and appreciated. The experience is spreading across the district, and we are very proud of the work we are doing, mirroring one of the SUSD core values, inclusion. We are creating an equitable environment where everyone is respected, treated with dignity, and has a sense of belonging. We are reaching the education support professionals where they are. We feel it is important to listen to their needs, see their work, and how each of them contribute to the educational system. Understanding the impact of each job family, understanding the impact each job family has and how they directly impact students is the experience that we want to keep sharing. And it is something to be supported, celebrated, and recognized. Our job is being accomplished only when we support each other, and we ask all other classifications, district leadership, and governing board to not forget that we as ESPs choose these jobs at the site level because we care about the students too. Sorry, I need to take a breath. We enjoy assisting the growth process by encouraging students to be their best selves and inspiring them to find their passion. In a lot of cases, these very students choose to reach out to us because they trust us. They make a connection with us as professionals, and they feel safe and cared for. This gives us great joy to give them the support they need to grow into their future selves. As mentioned in the past, we would like to thank this governing board for your unity in adopting the H policy back in April 2021, which now lives in our classified handbook of guidelines. We also want to thank this leadership for restoring the integrity of the meet and confer process with the associations, as we are here to support the entire classification through interest-based negotiations and not just our own job family or our own agenda. Another positive we want to share is the collaboration with the other associations. Who would have thought that we would still be using the hashtag Better Together? History was not on our side when SEA reached out to the rest of us as AA and SSPA. People thought we would still end up getting pinned against each other, and this could still possibly happen, but with us working together on items that impact us all, we are more educated in the process, we can make more informed decisions, and we can be united as a district. A front that could set the new standard of excellence for a strong district with core values that would make anyone want to be a part of. Thank you, Dr. Menzel, for supporting us through this new adventure. So what can we do better? The SSPA is working very hard in Meet and Confer to address the main issues outlined from our loop out surveys. We are battling minimum wage and compression. We can do better by developing a salary scale that outlasts us and addresses the need to honor those that have served a very long time, some serving over 20 years and not even near the top of their pay scale. We hope to stay proactive to help attract and train quality personnel. We ask that while we are in Meet and Confer and until salary budget is agreed upon for the next fiscal year, all salary budgetary items, advancements, and pay grades all be put on hold in the best interest of all. We have job families that were put on hold the minute the Meet and Confer process was brought back. We look to honor these appointments. We are also asking, again, that the governing board works with us to finally adopt the employee handbooks back to their classification agreements. It is our interest to start with the policies and procedures established in them before they were taken away as the building block to be annually reviewed for amendments through Meet and Confer. Honestly, I shouldn't have written this much. I'm just running. To have these officially restored and recognized would be the best interest of all staff members, no matter the classification. Having clear policies to our procedures hold people accountable and establishes equity. Please consider this request as an interest to better all working conditions and relations. Thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Menzel, President Sanowski, members of the governing board, Ms. Wagner, and guests. On this evening's action agenda, you have the task of approving the district's 301 Pay for Performance Compensation Plan. Since there is not a presentation for this item, I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity to celebrate the effort that went into assuring that this plan is before you. This past fall, our HR department convened a committee to make necessary changes to our current 301 plan to bring it into compliance with state statute and board policy. I, along with another teacher and a speech and language pathologist, represented certified interests on this committee with other district members serving. As classroom teachers, we do not address the needs of our students in silos, but as part of collaborative teams. In the past, 301 funds were limited to a narrow definition of classroom teachers by statute. In bringing the new plan into compliance with new statutes, one priority was to be able to include other eligible certified staff, such as special education-related service providers, SLPs, and our school nurses, to name a few. We are grateful to our HR department for making it a district priority to do this work and for the committee members that brought together the information and resources to make the necessary changes. Once the plan was drafted, there was a short timeline to get the information to those eligible and to return a vote. The changes to the plan had to be approved by 70% of those eligible to receive this 301 pay. Our site-level administrators, in collaboration with our SEA site representatives, all with plates very full of other pending responsibilities, took on the Herculean task of ensuring that all those eligible had an opportunity to review the information, get their questions answered, and to vote. We are happy to report after this process that our plan was approved by 87% of eligible staff. Thanks to this collaborative effort, our certified staff, including many who have never before been eligible, will realize their 301 compensation for this school year. Of course, the ability for SUSD certified staff to receive this payment, regardless of your approval this evening, is contingent on legislative action to override the current aggregate expenditure limit. The SEA applauds SUSD's proactive stance on relaying the vital information to our learning communities about what is at stake as the March 1st deadline approaches. Across Arizona, many educators and supporters of public education are organizing, engaging in grassroots efforts to create awareness and solidarity around the issue of the AEL and the dire circumstances that the failure of our legislature to act will create for public school students across our state. Actions have included Blackout Mondays, standouts, and walk-ins with school communities. As you notice these actions amplified in our own school district, we hope you will add your support in word and in deed. As board members elected to be stewards of our public schools, your actions will speak loudly not only to our 22,000 SUSD students, but the 1.1 million students across Arizona whose families have chosen our public schools. Finally, the SEA continues to participate in the interest-based negotiation process to articulate the interests and priorities of certified staff in SUSD. While conservative budget projections fall short of meeting current cost of living increases, our bargaining team is tasked with proposing creative and bold contingency language to trigger further negotiation as more information about next year's budget emerges. We know through the strategic planning process and the expressed goal of attracting and retaining highly qualified professionals that the district shares our interest in ensuring that the value of our certified staff is reflected in our compensation package. As we move forward in our interest-based negotiation process, we ask the district to be creative and bold in finding and dedicating resources to meet the salary needs at the site level where the greatest impact on our students will be realized.
President Sanowski, Vice President Hart-Wells, members of the board, Dr. Menzel, Ms. Wagner, and guests. We again acknowledge and thank this governing board and Dr. Menzel for your recognition of our employee associations, the adoption of policy HA, and a return to the practice of meet and confer through interest-based negotiations. I have some things written, but I'd have to say that I believe that SSPA and SEA have really captured the process that we have been through and what is most positive of what's transpired through this process is the relationship that we have with our associations and really learning about the interests and how they're focused towards our schools and the needs of our students and serving them in the best way possible at our sites. We have, through our interest-based negotiations, have begun with 8 interests, and these do include 4 immediate proposals that address salary compression and contract equity. We believe that our salary proposals are conservative of meeting our interests and is respectful to all employee categories that are also have the same interests to address the compression that has occurred over the years. The other 4 interests address the need for a plan that is focused on the adoption of an employment agreement and a return to more transparent practices that were established through our previous employment agreement. We look forward to continuing the work of interest-based negotiations and the adoption of our employment agreement.
At this time, are there any questions or comments that any of the board members would like to make? I see people busy writing, taking notes. If no questions, and I just want to make a comment. I'd like to thank all of you for stepping up during this time. I understand that the work that you all do as leaders in our district is uncompensated financially, but it's compensated with great appreciation. So I love that you guys, I kept hearing the theme collaboration over and over and over, because you are better together. So thank you all for the work that you do, and to all of your members and those that you represent. Appreciate your work. And at this time, we are going to move on to 4B, School Resource Officers SRO Partnership Overview, and Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Stanowski, members of the governing board. As Dr. Sakos makes her way to the podium, I also want to point out that the partnership that we have with Scottsdale Police Department in particular is significant. We also partner with the Phoenix Police Department for a couple of our SROs, but tonight we have Chief Walther with us, along with Sergeant Bingham and Officers Case and Lines, and you might recognize some special field agents and Rocket and Captain. And so we're really grateful for the partnership that we have and the opportunity to share with the governing board the various ways in which the partnership is producing results for our students. So Dr. Sakos, thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Menzel. President Sanowski, Vice President Hartwells, governing board members, Dr. Menzel and Gladys. I first have to point out, I think our crisis canines are separated back there because were they naughty and playing too much? Oh, it's nap time. All right. Wow, it's been nearly a year since I stood before you and shared with you the Scottsdale Police Department and Phoenix Police Department's valuable partnership with SUSD. When we ended that presentation, I talked about some next steps, and those next steps were including the refinement and collaboration in our training. We talked about review of our intergovernmental agreements, or IGAs, to mirror really the practices that our units participate in. And we talked about the data collection on program impact, expansion of the SRO Crisis Canine, and lastly, looking at programs like Be Smart and gun safety as part of our ongoing initiatives. With that, I'm happy to report that in terms of our crisis response training, the Prepare model specifically is one that is coordinated through the National Association of Schools, the psychologists, and we have been able to continue to train social workers and school psychologists in this past fall, in fall 2021. I do want to note that the NASP has now come up with Prepare 3, and we're going to continue to have trainers of trainers. Right now, we have Ms. Cron and we have James Dorr, who are our internal trainers in Prepare, and we're going to continue to enhance our depth of trainers so that we can bring those best practices, which are really in de-escalation strategies when we're dealing with students in crisis. Next, our comprehensive threat assessment training. I shared with you that SUSD many years ago has adopted the threat assessment model that came out of the University of Virginia, Dr. Dewey Cornell, which is the coveted threat assessment model. And we have a number of our social workers, our new psychologists, our assistant principals, and our new counselors that were also trained in the fall of 2021. So we're really trying to, again, make sure those annual trainings are reoccurring and that we're updating the best practices that we're hearing from the field. The intergovernmental agreement with the Scottsdale Police Department and Phoenix Police Department. I shared with you in the last presentation nearly a year ago the costs from right here, 18-19 to 21-22. The change that is coming forward this year, as I mentioned, is the IGA language reflecting the program practice right now. So when that IGA does come before you from Ms. Bird, you will see some drastic changes in the language that really share what our school resource officers do in our schools each and every day, including adding what we have now in terms of our crisis canine program. The good news to share tonight is also that we are moving to a 75-25 split with the Scottsdale Police Department. And so that is a reduction from an 80-20 split in the cost to a 75-25 split. And that will be for our 9 SROs plus our 1 sergeant in the Scottsdale Police Department. You do not see 22-23 estimated cost here this evening because, like SUSD, these agencies are also going through their budgeting process right now, and we don't have an anticipated cost, although we know that the one with Scottsdale Police Department may even drop a little bit. So we're very appreciative of that partnership. In terms of looking at impact of the school resource officer, I stood before you a few months ago, or the Student Advisory Board did, and talked about the responses from the voices, which we, again, reinforced tonight how important it is to hear the voices of our youth. The voices from our students regarding what they believed was the strength of our SRO program and also potential enhancements. We took those same 2 questions that were really, again, following the Student Advisory Board's lead and extended it to our parents and our staff, 6th through 12th grade, and asked the same 2 questions. What are the benefits of the school resource officer program? What could be implemented to improve the function of our school resource officer program? Happy to report that we had over 1,300 respondents that shared their thoughts. 1,200 of those, just over 1,200 were parents, with 158 being staff members. You can see the range of thoughts that were posted, and then you can see the ratings. And so this is each individual going in and rating the different thoughts of 26,000, over 26,000. And you can see the distribution by grade level in which a parent reported their student attends or in which a staff member says that they serve students there. I chose to put up this, what's called a differences slide, to really show the differences in opinions regarding our school resource officer program. This is something that the Thought Exchange does allow us to do, and it looks different from what the kids reported last time, and I'll share why in just a minute. But basically, you can see that 562 participants really were sided with side A. And some of the things they listed there were school safety. It is a necessary thing to have officers at schools. An SRO is first line of security if there's a school shooting, drugs, or other concerns. Role model, the importance of being a role model and wearing many hats, and safety. That 5.0 that you see in blue at the side there is, of those 562 that their views are on side A, those are your top ratings. So those are the ones that they rated it on a scale of 1 through 5, being 5. So those are the top ones, the statements that were agreed with. If you look at the green from side B, those individuals rated those particular statements as, for instance, a 1.0, 1.0, 1.7, 1.2. And then on the converse, you can see side B, the same thing. You can see where on side B, of these 87, the average score was that 5.0 with some of the concerns they have with the programming. And just to mention a couple, the school system is already designed as a prison system. Now you want to add police officers. How is this normal? This is a terrible idea. I do not agree with SROs in schools, and I do not believe police belong in our schools. So you can see, again, both sides of opinions on the particular matter. What's really neat about this thought exchange and the differences page is where is the common ground? Where's that common ground between those who believe that school resource officers are beneficial to have in our schools and those who don't believe that they are beneficial in our schools? And those are the ones in the middle. And so you can see safety. For those who are on side A, they rated that as a 5.0. And then even those on side B still rated it pretty high as a 4.0. So you can see there that safety, the safety of our kids is the top priority. They promote a sense of community and coach good, safe behaviors. The report that came out of Thought Exchange is actually about 23 pages long. So I actually just included the top ones here so that you could get a flavor of it. But essentially, from the students to the parents to the staff, it was a sense of safety. Someone will be there if there was some type of crisis, I can go to somebody if I need help, it's a good positive relationship. They're a role model. We loved when they come into classes and do lessons. So there was quite the range of positive feedback and from this perceptive data. The next slide is just a reminder. You've seen this already from the Student Advisory Board. And it looks different because the students took the information, like I just showed you, out of Thought Exchange, and they basically synthesized it themselves and came up with their own terms here. So they didn't show you the raw comments like I showed you from the parents and the students, but they shared with you the benefits in terms of helping community, crime prevention, feeling of safety, which was overwhelming across all three of the subgroups. The cultivates relationships and the social emotional support with the crisis canine. We did open it back up for our students, and we received probably about 40 more participants, and so I listed the participants there at the bottom. And then the enhancements, again, the overall awareness of the SRO program, more involvement in the classes, crisis canines on more campuses, and they shared more stickers because they like the relationship and getting the stickers from the school resource officer. Similarly, the parents, the enhancements that they primarily reported were around visibility, knowing that SROs are on our campuses and the function and the role that they have on our campuses, and continuity. They really wanted to see that our SROs, once they're on a campus, that they stay on that particular campus because, of course, they build those relationships. In terms of our update on the focus on prevention and intervention, I'm going to talk about three different things: our restorative justice program, which is that alternative to arrest and court for eligible first-time juvenile offenders, our crisis canine expansion, and safe gun storage. With that, this is the data that was provided from the Scottsdale Police Department. And what I did here is I took 2020 juvenile contacts and 2021 juvenile contacts. These are juvenile offenses within the city of Scottsdale. This does not include all SUSD students, but many of these are our students. And of course, all of these youth live within our community. So what I really want to point out here is the movement toward the restorative justice intervention program to help students, instead of being given a ticket or booked in jail, they are given an opportunity to participate in restorative justice and do right with what was wrong, to restore that relationship with the individual that they offended or the parties that they offended. So what I want to point out in the 2020 pie chart there, the dark green, that in 2020, 14% of the juvenile contacts were able to participate in the restorative justice process. And if you look at 2021, which is in the lighter green, you see that increase to 23%. And so I wanted to share that because I think it's important to see that rather than our students having other options that are listed there to the right, and these are police terminology, the court-ordered fingerprints or booked task force, that would be like DUI or booked in jail. You can see that we're making a nice movement to participating, our youth participating in the restorative justice program. To the bottom right there, it says 2020 incident status. So in 2020, and these are years, this is the actual calendar year and not a fiscal year like a school district. So all of last year in 2020, those that participated in the restorative justice program, 93% of them passed, 3% failed, and there's 4% that were still active at the time this data was collected. So that shows a very high passage rate, and of course, when we look at repeat offenders in our campuses, we, of course, are seeing an impact of those behaviors, specifically when they were repeated on our campus, not from the same offenders. So we're really excited about that. The top RGIP charges here, I just put into a little chart. We shared some of this data with you in the last presentation or last year in a different format. But you can see that the top one from 2018 to 2021 is that minor possession, tobacco, vape, or paraphernalia. The second one across the board has been the shoplifting, removal of goods. And then you can see in 2020 and 2021, criminal trespass, criminal damage, and disorderly conduct topped out the 5 top referral process versus the other violations I noted at the bottom, where the top referrals included marijuana possession, use, drug paraphernalia, narcotic drugs, synthetic prescriptions, truancy, and curfew violation. So it's just, to me, it was interesting to see how those top 2 really remained over the last 5 years, but we've seen a shift over to 2021. With that, in terms of continuing with the SRO prevention programming, we talked about expansion of our Crisis K-9 program. So joining Rocket, I don't know if they're going to get up and, so joining Rocket, oh, they're being invited to the front now to come and sit. So Rocket is with Officer Lyons. Officer Lyons is the school resource officer assigned to Chaparral High School. And Rocket has been with us for 2 years now?
Just about a year and a half.
About a year and a half now. And so joining Rocket is Captain, who is a golden doodle, and he is, his handler is Officer Pease, who is stationed at Coronado High School. I have to note that our 2 crisis canines, SUSD does not fund these. There's outside parties and agencies that do. Our foundation has been involved in helping us identify different funds from different organizations like the Farley Family Charitable Trust. And so we haven't paid for any of the crisis canine needs, and we have enough funds now to actually add a 3rd one that's coming in August of 2022. So we're very excited. That crisis canine will be stationed with the middle school right next door. Officer Steele, these gentlemen had to test, which I understand is a pretty rigorous process to test and to interview to be a canine handler. I hear it's harder than being in the mounted unit on a horse. I don't know if that's true or not, but this alone right here has really been a valuable asset to our students and to our staff. You can see already, come sit with me, come over here. So we're really appreciative for all of their hard work. In addition to our prevention programming with our Crisis K-9, one of the things we do when we are involved in any type of risk assessment or threat assessment that has occurred on campus, which the school resource officers are a part of, our SROs provide that education and safe storage of firearms, and oftentimes will ask the parents if they have firearms and actually do a home visit to see if they have firearms or if they're locked up. We did talk about last year considering programs like Be Smart to look at in terms of having these types of resources at our fingertips so that our administrators, our school resource officers, our counselors could have this information to share with our families. And this is parallel to what we do, for instance, with the drug and alcohol violation. We have the information handy from Not My Kid on Project Rewind, and we say, here's a valuable resource in order to help your student. And just a shameless plug, we have a lot of partners in the Scottsdale School District, and tomorrow, if you're if you're able to come to our 12th annual Mental Health in Schools, you'll see that we have about 35 partners coming tomorrow to, again, provide those resources to our schools. And we have SPC will be a part of it for a second year that will bring all of these valuable resources so we can have them for our families. Other prevention programming that we see from the police departments is that law-related education, the mentoring that they have with students. Of course, traffic safety is out there, and there's a plethora of other activities that they do. As we shared before, some of them are coaches for us. Officer Still next door, I think he has his guitar club with Saguaro and Mojave. So they do quite a bit to be a part of our school community. One last thing is not officer anymore, but James Dorr and I had an opportunity yesterday to present at the School Safety Summit for school safety and on our SRO program. And I can say that we're very fortunate for what our programming is able to offer, and you can really see the need from other administrators in the room as to, wow, how did you manage this? How did you do this? How did you do this? And so I have to thank all of you and our board over the years for really supporting our SRO program, and I wholeheartly think and know that it makes a big difference. So with that, I have a lot of individuals that are here to answer any questions, whether it's regarding the IGA, whether it is around our amazing crisis canines. So questions?
Vice President Hartwells.
Thank you, President Sanowski. Thank you, Dr. Sackos, for your presentation. Chief Walther for being here this evening. And I'm not sure if all of you know, but he was just awarded a award for excellence, being all-around awesome chief. So congratulations to him. Yes. And to all of our SROs and our field officers, Captain and Racket. Thanks for everything you're doing. I have a question about the restorative justice program. Is there a fee to the juvenile to participate in that program, or fees? Could you just give us a little summary on that, please? Thank you.
No, there are no fees. The program runs through our Youth and Family Services, which is through the city of Scottsdale. So that's how we route all of our juveniles to.
So what is that process in terms of making a decision? Is it the severity of the offense, or?
Yeah, so there's certain crimes that we obviously cannot send juveniles to. And this was all due in part with communication with the county attorney and working that out. But some of those obviously include like domestic violence crimes where we can't send through the program. All of our traffic offenses, so if someone's driving on a suspended license or a DUI, we cannot send there. But most of the ones you see up here, the disorderly conducts, the fights, all those types are the types of crimes we can send. Now with that, they have to be willing to do the program, and the victims have to be willing to do the program. Part of the restorative justice program is to give power back to the victims if they feel, and to help the offender understand how they harmed another individual. So that's a big part of it. So when we have these contacts, we make sure those two things are good and they're the proper crime, and then from there we give them a letter, or it's just basically like kind of citation that says they need to contact the Youth and Family Services by this date and this time. And then the parents and them make that arrangement, go there, have counseling sessions. A lot of it, they do community service, but throughout that time frame, usually a 2-month time frame, they're attending certain classes with Youth and Family Services to, again, get all this all worked out.
Thank you for that summary. So it sounds like the families or guardians are involved
Yes.
actively in the process?
Yes, very much so.
Very good, great, thank you. And then I had one other question with respect to prevention programming, and I understand you also have a number of other possible pilot programs that are being considered, and we're very excited to hear about those when they're ready. But the law-related education, is there something formal where there are certain programs that could be offered, or is it more of an ad hoc?
It's really dependent on the schools and the teachers, because obviously we need to take up time for the teachers to do this. So a lot of our SROs individually reach out to certain groups, or just initially in the beginning of the year send an email out, hey, this is what I can teach on. But we'll switch anything up. When I was a school resource officer, I did everything from bullying presentations, especially if I had a certain class that was dealing with an issue of a few students, I would do a special presentation just for that class. But we would have that. I did everything from a bullying presentation where I incorporated Lord of the Flies, which they were reading at the time, and kind of talked about that and built that up. But it can be anything from just government and laws and just how police interact and why we do certain things, just again to build those relationships with the students.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, I did have a question.
Yes.
So it was reported, I had the same questions as Vice President Hartwell, so I'm glad she asked them. But one more thing, like there was an incident status of pass and not pass.
Yes.
What's required to pass?
PASS is basically to complete the program, to attend all the counseling sessions, classes that the Youth and Family Services do, and basically just be present and to finish their community service, which is part of it. So I think with that 3%, that was only 2 fails for the 2021 year that we had. And one was they just stopped communicating and didn't attend. In those situations, we have to then go back and then actually file charges on that. And that's part of that process.
Thank you. Do you guys track repeat offenders at all?
Yes, we do. And I am happy, I don't have the numbers for all the years, but I can tell you for 2021, we had 0% repeat offenders. And we saw the percentages was a decrease each year that we did that. What's unique about that program is, or the only thing that's unfortunate about that program is we can only keep track of a certain time frame, because part of the restorative justice program is after they go through this program, the whole idea is they're never entered into the criminal system. So at a certain point, it gets dropped off. So we can't keep that information, because if we did, then we'd still be tracking them, which we're not supposed to do. So for benefit to them, we can't track more than a 5-year time frame. But from what we've seen a decrease every single year, and last year we had a 0% recidivism rate.
Excellent. And I look forward to learning more about the IGA, the change in details in that itself. And I thank all of you who played a role in this presentation and in this work. I know it's been a big lift, but I feel it's very important for our district to be concerned about the issues of making sure our students do have appropriate role models throughout their educational experience, including our SROs.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? No? All right. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sakos.
Thank you.
And at this time, we move on to 4C, the second read of changes to B policies. And I will turn this over to Board Member Greenberg at this time.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, members of the board. Before you today is a second read only of policies BDA and policy BEDH. These policies were not placed for a second read and action item due to, in one instance, some amendments to the policy proposal. And in another case, I think a clear indication that the board wanted more time to discuss and review the changes and perhaps discuss as a board. For policy BDA, the revisions deal with the removal of a board officer and appointment of a new board officer. At the previous meeting, I noted that establishing a system of due process would be quite difficult, which is why that was not pursued. However, I was asked to reconsider that and put in a proposal that would work. This proposal is a simplified version, in essence, of what would occur under Robert's Rules of Order, Section 63, which is, of course, the kind of de facto basis for all rules of order, and, of course, something used in parliamentary procedure in many areas, as well as kind of the standard constitutional requirements of substantive and procedural due process. Under the proposal, we could remove a board officer and appoint a new one for cause, that cause being a violation of their duties, failing to perform their duties, or for committing a felony or other offense pertaining to their office. These are also grounds for removal of an officer from the board in general under Arizona law. It's important to note that really, unless a board member vacates their office as defined by law, the other 3 board members cannot be sanctioned or done anything to them. So the other 3 board members would essentially be in a position where they could commit acts potentially that violate a policy of the district, but nothing could occur to them. So there had to be some sort of balance struck, and it was felt that this process was a fair process by equating it to the grounds for vacancy there. In addition, there is an investigatory process in both cases under cause, and during that investigation, the board could remove the officer pending the outcome of the investigation, which was felt as an appropriate step to allow the investigation to proceed without being hindered. And then, of course, if cause is substantiated by the evidence, the board could move to remove the officer permanently and replace them. Alternatively, if no evidence is found to support the matter, they would just be reinstated as an officer. Policy BEDH, the policy on public comments, no changes have been made to this proposal as far as I can recall. However, the board did want more information on it and did want the opportunity to discuss it further. Last night it was pointed out that one of the names of the schools was in the incorrect place. That is why you received an email today noting that there was an edit. There was a reference to Cheyenne. It should have been a reference to Peoria, and the reference to Peoria should have been replaced with the reference to Cheyenne. It was a clerical error. That said, I think there's 2 things I would like to... Chandler, sorry, Cheyenne. I'm losing my mind. Thank you, to Chandler. That said, there are a couple things I'd like to note just because the questions were raised. For Chandler Unified School District Regulation BEDHR, there's some interesting points made here. For example, I'm quoting now, the president reserves the right to ensure that speakers present on topics within the governing board's jurisdiction. Well, that is one of the changes that's proposed in our policy. Another quote, the president of the governing board reserves the right to ensure that speakers' presentations are pertinent and not repetitive in order for the matter to be handled fairly and expeditiously. That is also language that is used in the policy proposal before you. One thing that is not in there, but that Chandler does have, is a specific reference to law enforcement. Profanity or threats of harm will not be tolerated. If necessary, the governing board shall request the assistance of law enforcement to respond to threats of harm or other conduct that creates a concern for the safety of the members of the board, district staff, or students, or the public. So I'm just highlighting that there as something that goes above and beyond what the proposal tonight submits. Kyrene School District, number 28, Exhibit BEDH, notes that comments must be on the following item on the agenda. So that is limited to agenda comments. Peoria, again, limits to public comments on agenda items. That is not something that is being proposed tonight, but I'm just, again, it is included in language as optional that the president could impose under the proposal tonight. But I'm just trying to draw that connection here. Fountain Hills certainly has a very, and in addition, Peoria has very strict rules on political speeches and other disorderly conduct. They note that it is inappropriate to utilize a public hearing, the public comment segment, or any other agenda items for the purpose of making political speeches. Engaging in such conduct and failing to cease such conduct upon request of the presiding officer will be grounds for ending a speaker's time at the podium or for the removal of any disruptive person from the meeting at the direction of the board president. So again, language included there. Fountain Hills has a slightly different system. They allow a total of 15 minutes of public comments on any matter, but that is a hard 15 minutes, and at most you have 3 minutes to speak as a speaker. If there are 15 speakers who want to discuss whatever is on their mind that is not on the agenda, they would each be given about 1 minute to speak. By contrast, if you are speaking on topics on the agenda, you are given 5 minutes to speak, and there is an optional time that the board can implement after the agenda item. So usually you would comment first. These are my thoughts on this agenda item. You would then have the board discussion on the agenda item, and then if there were people in the members of the public who still wanted to make it, comments, the board could optionally reopen the public comment section on the agenda item to allow those individuals to speak. It should be noted that a number of places, including Fountain Hills, anticipate the concept of trying to balance out. I looked at LAUSD, I looked at Clark County in Nevada, I looked at, I couldn't look at everything, but I tried to look at some key ones. There are plenty of places that also kind of balance out things. So if there are 5 speakers for something and 4 speakers against, they may only choose 2 for and 2 against. And that is very similar to what Arizona's legislature does for requests to speak as well. And finally, I just note, because I think the arguments are set out here, and I'll allow the board to discuss, but I really appreciated the comments by our students tonight during the MLK Voices thing. And one thing that certainly stood out was the concept of diversity not being enough, and the ability for us to be intentional about it, and specifically to provide a, quote, safe environment for people from diverse backgrounds to speak and share their thoughts. And I think one of the major issues that we've encountered, as we've seen from emails we've received from parents and students, is that they do not feel safe coming to our board meetings to speak on topics that are within the board's jurisdiction, and even topics on the agenda, just because of how our public comments have been handled in the past few months, year. And I think it really, beyond being a legal right that the board can take certain steps to hopefully alleviate that, I do feel that it is a moral imperative that we fix that situation and make sure that our community feels safe coming to our board meetings to speak on topics on the agenda or matters within the board's jurisdiction. And with that, I will turn it over for any discussion on additional proposals, amendments, or desired changes.
Governing board members, comments, questions, concerns? Vice President Hartwells.
Thank you, President Sanowski, and thank you, Board Member Greenberg, for your holistic read of the B policies. I had not appreciated kind of how hodgepodge some of the dates of adoptions across the board, the B policies are, and this was illuminating. I'm not going to comment on the other board policies that are on the action, but I will raise a few comments and / questions for BDA and then on to BEDH. For BDA, the proposed board officer vacancy, first I'll just make a comment. This policy as proposed assumes there is a vice president. However, that isn't required in, well, previously it wasn't required, right? That was optional. So for example, the board agenda setting doesn't contemplate there's a vice president that would step in and hit the ground running. So I just noted that as an observation. In terms of board officer vacancy process that's outlined here, my review of policy BBBD did not necessarily, the dots did not connect on how those provisions would connect to the president position. They connect to the board member as an elected official, but not just the board presidents as an elected among us. So these policies, just for the community, just to be very clear, are how the board conducts itself, operates, and manages itself. So I did not see the necessity of the pursuant to policy BBBD provision because I didn't see the connection on how that would be relevant to the vacancy of the president. And I'll let you comment, but I'm going to, if I can just go ahead and go through and then I'll stop talking and you can. The last sentence that the new president would appoint a new officer to serve as vice president, I disagree with that. I think as the board members should, by majority vote, decide who is going to be the president, given the amount of, their role as the board president and the authority that they have over setting the agenda. So I would prefer that then novate to the board to elect a new vice president if they so choose, right? Because that, again, that's not required. And then the provision, the next paragraph in that same new paragraph, or new subsection, rather, whenever there's a vacancy of the office of the vice president, again, the pursuant to board policy BBBD, to me, just kind of hangs out there. I don't see the connection. I do not think that, I think the language could be written in an optional way. If the board chose to have a new vice president, then they would elect a new vice president. And I would argue then, if those changes were made, that third statement would not be necessary. On the appointment of a new officer section that's been added and proposed, I appreciate the comments about due process. I didn't quite understand the what I thought was a description of the other board members could behave in a retaliatory way. I'm not sure I understood that. And in concept, due process is fine. That's right. It's America, due process. I get that. However, I thought some of the language specifically that was proposed is vague in terms of it's how to interpret it, and just possibly a opportunity for dispute in and of itself of the words used. And so for that reason, there is some text that I would be more comfortable having removed. Again, because I don't believe the metes and bounds of what's stated is clear. And I don't think the intent is to make this less clear. It's to outline a process. Right? But sometimes the policies can be too proscriptive, and then you're stuck into this way, and then you might invite more confusion, which wasn't intended. So this is not assigning a motivation, but there is some proposed language changes that I would like to submit for consideration if that's where this next step is, okay? But I want to be clear about the board officer vacancy, and you will see this in my comments throughout the policies this evening, is that I think the board should retain its ability to elect its officers and not have one person be given the authority to appoint. Thank you. And I'm going to stop there, and I'll give you a chance if you want to respond or react to some of that.
It would probably be easier if everybody who has comments, and then I respond at one time.
So that was just BDA, and I'm going to stop.
Oh, okay.
No.
Board Member Beckman?
So are we going to just hit BDA first, do you prefer, and then do BEDH second? And give you an opportunity to respond individually to each?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, well, mine is kind of short but sweet. In agreement that the vote's important to me. I'm reluctant to give up my vote almost on any item. I have before, and I think that was the only time with Dr. Menzel when we gave him the opportunity to define the COVID mitigation risk parameters, but I'm very concerned about that, and I would be reluctant to do so.
Is that it?
Yeah.
That was simple. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? I would like to just respond generally as well. I do wholeheartedly support the election process. I think it's really important to any organization that everyone has a voice in this organization. We are elected officials. We are expected to serve in the best interest of our district. And I think it holds us accountable when we continue to have a voice and a vote. I do agree with you that the moral imperative of safety is something that we should really strive for. I value public comment. I value all the different means that the public does reach out to us and communicate with us. But I think there's something very valuable to having someone come to us at one of our meetings and share with us ideas, issues and ideas for improvement. And so I would like us to really consider that is not just necessarily what's on the agenda, and I know I'm kind of going back and forth, but these are more general statements I'm sharing, because we have received information from parents during public comment on things that have not been part of our agenda, that have brought to our attention some issues and some of our shortfalls, that then allows us to improve as leaders and make better decisions in our district. So I like that we, I wish that everyone that came to public comment actually did focus on, what topics are within our board's jurisdiction, and I wish that was the focus. There are lots of things I can wish for in the manner in which people present, but we don't get to control that as far as how someone chooses to address us. So yes, we could say within board's jurisdiction, but I also value that whole idea of sometimes we don't know, and so we don't have it on the agenda. So I don't know if we can find some separate space for that, although we do have people who email us and call us and request to meet with us at different times as well. So I just really want to protect that input process. I think the term pertinent is something that we can interject into this, because I think what really needs to be clearly understood and appreciated is our role is for school governance. And we don't get to control what happens in different places in our society. So I want us to stay, like our policy should really stay focused on our work as governing board members. And so as we're having this discussion, I would like that to continue to be, and I really appreciate the work that you've done on this, Board Member Greenberg. I think constantly re-examining how we can be better makes us better, helps us become better. So take what you wish from my comments and add that accordingly. Yes, Board Member Lindsay.
I just was focused on the public comment aspect, and I appreciate all the work that Board Member Greenberg did. But I got, people that know me know that I like to research. And so legal counsel gave me a list of districts that don't allow public comment on non-agenda items. And when I got to researching them, they all seem to allow public comment on non-agenda items. Kyrene, for example, I watched their board meeting, their most recent one, and they had 5 public comment speakers, and they were all about masks. And masks were not on their agenda. And the board president even stated, like, we can't respond to items not on the agenda, and then the superintendent gave comments. And on their board docs, they even say that state statute prohibits the governing board from discussing an item that is not on the agenda, but we do listen and can request that the staff follow up on any concerns. Peoria, they actually allow on their agenda 5.1, requests to address the governing board regarding matters not included on the agenda. And then they go further that someone can fill out a card and comment on any agenda item. Gilbert was another one where I was told they don't allow public comment on non-agenda items, and they do. I actually like what Chandler does. In a way, it's more expansive. And I don't know if Dr. Menzel had a chance to talk to Mr. Narducci, but they actually allow the public to fill out a public comment card on their website, and it goes to all the board members, and the comments get posted on the website. So you can choose to do public comment electronically, or you can come to the board meeting and speak. And it seems to have helped there somewhat. At the last board meeting, they had 6 submissions electronically that were given to the board, go up on the website, and then I believe they had 3 public speakers. And Dr. Menzel was telling me they're probably the closest to us with similar issues with public comment. So that seems to have improved. Kyrene was another one. They did the same thing. They have an online submission, and I believe they said at the last meeting they had 4 submissions. So it just seemed to be helpful, and maybe that'd be something to consider.
Dr. Menzel, do you want to comment?
I have had an opportunity, I didn't speak with Superintendent Narducci today, but have had a prior conversation with him, and I think that that process of online registration and the submission, which is summarized by their public information officer in terms of what was submitted online, seems to have released some of the pressure. I mean, they still have times where there are more speakers than other times at the governing board meeting, but creating two formal avenues for doing so seems to have been helpful.
Kind of like the legislative request to speak system at the state capitol.
And do we know how long they've had that? Like, is that a relatively new thing that they've had? Because it was just interesting, because the PIO gets up and they just say, hey, we had 6 submissions this week, and they don't get into detail. They say they were sent to the board, they're on the website for public viewing, and they give a brief little overview of what the topic was. So it just seems to be helpful.
Okay. Thank you, Board Member Lindsay. Board Member Beckman?
So regarding BEDH, because we're kind of talking about that now, it seems, I agree. I think we should consider adding the electronic component to our public comment and broadening it. One of the concerns I've heard repeatedly is that public comment goes too long. This will potentially invite some of our individuals to comment through this means shortening the board meeting potentially, and also allowing those that are uncomfortable attending physically to be heard. Another point I wanted to make with regard to this, just as something of concern, is how are we going to handle this if you were talking about limiting the stakeholders on BEDHA, persons who reside within the district or property owners in the district or parents or guardians, students who attend? How is that happening? Who would handle it? Are we hiring someone new? What would the cost be? If this was put through, is it a new technology? Is someone going to stand at the door? How would we vet that? And then how are we defining stakeholder? I know that we're primarily funded through our property taxes. We're all aware of that. But we just received a great deal of ESSER funding. We also we're one of 16 districts that received DSEG funding. We're talking about 301 funding. So are we defining stakeholder as only a Scottsdale property taxpayer, or are we going to not consider Arizona or government or other taxes part of as stakeholders? So that's a concern to me too.
Board Member Greenberg, would you like to respond?
I have to admit that I will address the substantive comments, and I appreciate the feedback. And Board Member Hartwells, Vice President Hartwells, I look forward to the suggested recommendations, so I appreciate you sharing that with us because that's how this process gets better. But I have to say I'm a little remiss to hear the comment that people who feel safe speaking in public may do so in person, but those who feel unsafe can do so electronically. What kind of democracy is that?
That was an option.
Well, that was your statement, but beyond that, on the matter of policy BDA, I must apologize. The intent was not to remove a board vote. I think it's quite common that when the board appoints a president and vice president, the understanding is that if the president is not available and the vacancy is a term of art, it's a legal term, those are the grounds in which an officer would be vacating their seat, and not be an officer anymore or a board member. But I think it's generally understood that when you appoint a president and vice president or chairman or vice chairman, same as our federal government, or if the governor leaves office, we have the Secretary of State, there's an automatic kind of transferal process. So the recommendation was to make that an automatic process just to make it easier rather than having a vote on the topic. I didn't personally view it as forsaking a vote because we have made our vote, we've made our decision. We have a president, vice president. If President Sanowski is not available, you would be president, and that's that was just how I envisioned it. So I apologize if that's how that came off. Certainly that was really just about making the process smooth. But I will review your recommendations and we can discuss further. I know Lori has been working with me to smooth out any edges there. On the language for the appointment of a new officer and the due process side, I look forward to seeing your suggestions. It's hard to comment on vagueness or that type of commentary. I did take that language from the BBBD comments that, the state statute uses terms like, failing to fulfill your duties, or they use the term committing a felony or other offense related to your office. So those are taken from BBBD, which is just a copy of state statute on the matter, but there's certainly room for improvement on all of these. So I look forward to those suggestions on that point. On policy BEDH, President Sanowski, you commented on the question, you delineated between agenda items and non-agenda items. The proposal has an automatic requirement in the proposal that the matter be within the board's jurisdiction. So an issue related to the district that you were mentioning that could make our district better, where somebody comes in and says, I know this isn't on the agenda, but there's a real issue with the use of these secondary resources, or I don't think that this curriculum was adopted appropriately. That would still all be permitted under, it doesn't have to be an agenda item. But what the policy makes clear is that the board president could enact, if they wanted, an agenda restriction, which, as far as I'm aware, is a legal right that you already have as a time, manner, and place restriction and a restriction on content beforehand that you could impose. But if you recall our discussions from last year in our agenda setting meetings, one of the issues that I was very personally uncomfortable with was being asked to make changes to public comments without direct board oversight of those changes. And so what this proposal attempts to do is to basically accomplish that by saying, as a board, these are actions that we are comfortable with the president taking if necessary to achieve that. Because if you recall, we had some back and forth about limiting the time limit, because originally the district had an unlimited time limit. So anyone, anywhere could comment on anything for 3 minutes, but it could go on for hours and hours and hours. So even that was something that we had debated back and forth, and I'm sure you recall that. So I think that this is really just a restatement. To the extent that other districts have policies that they choose not to follow or waive in certain circumstances, I'm a board member for Scottsdale Unified School District. I don't know what other districts do in practice. I know what they allow for in policy, and what they allow for in policy are these restrictions. So presumably a board president could come in and say, I'm sorry, your comment is unduly repetitive, and it's not helping, it's extending this discussion far too long, and I'm gonna ask that you please stop. So whether Peoria or Fountain Hills or another district actually enforce that, I assume is up to them and the discretion of the board president, as it is currently with Board President Sanowski. On the issue of interested parties, the interested parties is really taken from case law, other jurisdictions, city councils, school districts that have very similar policies, not necessarily in Arizona, but even if I look at Fountain Hills, for example, their policy, and I don't know what they mean by this, but their policy says school employees, parents, students, and the community will be afforded the opportunity to address the governing board on agenda items. In other areas, when it's on any topic, it says any individual, but when it talks about agenda items, it limits it to school employees, parents, students, and the community. Again, I don't know if they enforce that policy, but that is what is stated in their policy, and presumably is something that could be enforced should they choose to do so if they're not already. I think that if we're going to have an electronic system, I think that's a really good concept. And that's certainly something we could add. I don't think we necessarily need to add that into policy. I think that's just a process that we could create. I will say that Again, as I noted in the background information, the request to speak system does require in-person registration at a kiosk. You can have someone do it for you. I'm not suggesting that. An online registration system seems perfectly viable, but even there, you do have to give your name, address, and email to register, which I think alleviates a number of the issues. If the question is that people may abuse the system by providing false information or, lying, I'm sure people do that with the request to speak system, but that's just how it is. I will note that in the request to speak system, they do the exact same thing where you can do online comments and you can do thumbs up, thumbs down. I think it's a green check mark, actually, and a red X. I don't remember. But if you are invited to speak, they choose who speaks. I mean, I'm sure it's, the first 3 people pro and the first 3 people against, but they choose who comes and speaks. It's still not a free-for-all during the meeting itself. So, there are other systems. But if people have recommendations for changes, again, I think they can be incorporated and improved. And then beyond that, I think this will otherwise just go to a vote, and it can be voted up or voted down at the next meeting.
Thank you, Board Member Greenberg. Vice President Hartwells?
Thank you, President Sinowski. I wish to clarify on BDA, I do not have an issue with the vice president filling the vacancy of the president. My issue was the subsequent sentence where there was going to be an appointment as opposed to an election.
I see what you mean. Okay.
And I agree in spirit, that is the whole point of having a vice president. But it is still an option. It's just optional. It's not required.
I appreciate that clarification, and I think that's something that can easily be put back in. Again, I just thought for expediency. But that makes sense. I appreciate you clarifying.
And I did not get a chance to share comments on BEDH yet, but I would like to. And they are more in line of, when thinking about having these policies, I'm not a big fan of having policies we don't live by. And that leads me to all of my questions of the proposed changes are directed to how would we enforce some of these provisions and how kind of bureaucratic would that become? And I think those are reasonable questions to think through the operation of the provisions. And so I'll leave it that there. I do have one question of council, and that is the R's that are in the policy, the regulations, the implementation of the policies themselves are written by staff. Is that correct?
Yes, we currently don't have a regulation that goes to public comment.
Okay.
But yes, as a general mechanism, the district writes the regulation implementing the policy that the board's approved, and then it goes to the board for, not for approval, but so that you know how that policy is being operationalized.
Thank you. So would that be if, as the suggestions have been made for consideration, an online submission for public comment? Could that be included in an operational document such as an R, a regulation, as opposed to? Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, I have one more question of council. Is it, in the operation of our public comments to date, there are questions that come up occasionally that do need follow-up. And it's not necessarily the board that has to follow up with those, but staff. Is it appropriate or not, and this is just a legal question for you, Ms. Byrd, for the subsequent board meeting, whether it's a special meeting or not, to have an item on the agenda that reads response to public comment questions raised on whatever date? Would that be appropriate within the scope of OML?
So let me make sure I understand what you're asking. Somebody in public comment raises a concern that staff then goes out and investigates and responds to, and then a report back to the board. Is that your question? Is a report back to the board appropriate?
Yes, I guess I'm trying to ask from the perspective that we can't comment. And it's not a conversation, it's a one-way kind of dialogue with the board. It's not really a dialogue. Would there be an opportunity, or is there a mechanism by which the subsequent board meeting, there could be that responsive follow-up, whether it's from the board or report to the board, where some of these questions that were asked or concerns were laid out?
So I think you're not going to like the lawyer answer, and I think the answer is this: it depends. It depends on the topic of the follow-up and whether or not it was specifically student-related, in which case we'd have FERPA considerations and other privacy considerations, or whether it was, you always have the opportunity in public comment to ask the district to give you more information about this. So, maybe something came up about SROs. It would be appropriate then at some point, I'd like to place on future agendas a presentation about SROs or about special education and whatever it was. But just to have every public comment with a report back would probably not be appropriate, because some of those are very individual specific and there would be privacy concerns.
Fair enough, and thank you for the response. And I wasn't suggesting that there be that kind of minutia reported back to the board, but where there are larger questions, so that there's some assurance that there's feedback and response.
I'm not sure that reporting back to the board is the appropriate way to handle that, but certainly board members can always follow up on with an individual constituent as to whether their concern was resolved. I'm hesitant to say that we're going to bring back every concern raised to the board, because I can see a myriad of problems that might arise with that, including never getting to the actual agenda items that were then on the agenda for the next board meeting. You'd be in a constant loop.
Okay, yeah, and I'm not trying to get into the administrative operation of the district. I'm just trying to find a way where there might be more of a two-way conversation, where public comment, the value of public comment could be extracted a little bit more
I don't
than
think
I feel
that
that it is now.
the way public comment is designed under statute, it's not intended to be a two-way conversation. It's because, remember, you are having a meeting in public, but it's not a public participation meeting. And so should we want to follow up on those? That's why it's very specific, where you only have three options, right? You can respond to criticism, you can ask that an item be placed on the agenda for further review, or you can direct, that the staff please look into whatever matter. It really can't be a two-way conversation, at least as how I read public comment being designed in Arizona.
Board Member Beckman? Oops, I'm sorry, Dr. Hurtwells, are you finished? Okay. Board Member Beckman.
So with regard to looking into a matter, haven't we previously, or is it in bounds, for Dr. Menzel and his superintendent comments to kind of report back on things he's discovered that were brought up in, for instance, a previous meeting? Not a board member speaking to the public, but reporting on, if there was a busing situation, and he's going to come back to the public and say, we looked into, just so the public knows, we've resolved this, X, Y. I think we may have done something like that before.
I reserve the right not to give you a definitive answer on the spot, because I can envision times where that would be more than perfectly legally admissible. Remember, there are also constraints upon what the superintendent's remarks can contain. And so I would like the opportunity to answer your question with a little bit more thought and just not answer it off the top of my head, because I don't want to give you the wrong answer.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Board Member Greenberg?
Two things. To the question of enforceability, I think that a number of the items can be enforced. So I don't know, it's hard. I don't know which. I'm sure you can provide those in your commentary. feedback, and I look forward to seeing that. Obviously, you know, a matter within our jurisdiction if somebody comes and discusses their candidacy for congressional seat 2, beyond being a potential legal violation as using public school property for political campaigning. You know, that can be enforced as it was by President Sanowski. The issue, the question, the bureaucratic question of how do you verify someone's, you know, who they say they are is, you know, I think it's just part of that online registration system. You know, students and staff and parents and guardians of students all have student ID or staff IDs. I think it's very easy to verify in our system, you know, someone at least is purporting to be who they say they are. You know, the only individuals who might be more difficult are residents or property owners who don't have anything, but I think, you know, it's very easy for them to provide, you know, a bill or anything if we want to get that granular with it. I generally trust people to be honest in their submissions to the government. That is, of course, something that can be abused, but just like any law, people break them. And I think that, but again, we can approve a version of this policy proposal that does not include that. You know, there's millions of different ways. Council has pointed out that there are many places that have preferential treatment. So if you are a resident, property owner, student, parent, guardian, staff member, you speak first in the limited time, you know, if there's only 30 minutes. And unfortunately, if that takes up the bulk of the time and you are not within that stakeholder group, an interested party, then you are, you know, not, you just can't speak. You know, so there's that kind of time limit and prioritization preference. The other concept that I did not discuss with the council, and I'm sure this will give her heartburn right on the spot, is that you could, in theory, even though regulations are drafted by staff, I guess there's the possibility that you could provide the president and vice president or the opportunity to, as we elect each new one, promulgate their own regulation as to how they wish to oversee public comments in terms of, you know, I'm board president, I don't care that people talk for 7 hours and I'll give them unlimited time to speak. You have a board president who says, you know, everybody gets only 3 minutes. I don't know if that's a possibility. I'm sure I won't ask her now because I'm sure she'll have to go back and think about it and then she'll strangle me after the meeting. But, you know, so there are alternatives.
I do want to make a comment, though.
Yeah.
And I will say this, the B policies are different than some of our other policies in that they go to how the board conducts itself and how the meetings themselves are conducted. In that sense, whereas we write regulations for instruction and student conduct, the district, the administration does, those are, so we operationalizing the policies that are going to be implemented by the administration. So I don't think that what you're suggesting that the board itself, and I wouldn't like it to change with every changing president, but that it is within the realm of possibility, and again, this isn't your definitive answer, that because this particular section of policy deals with how you govern yourself, that the manner in which you operationalize your policies could be controlled by vote and approval by members of the board.
Thank you. So I think we've gotten out a lot of good ideas here, and we can close this conversation. I'll just say if you have those ideas, Board Member Hartwells, others, please submit them to Lori because that helps us refine. She comes to me, and I can refine kind of the concepts, and then of course we can always make further adjustments during the board meeting. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Oh, Board Member Lindsay.
Dr. Menzel, when you talked to Mr. Narducci, could you find out if their BEDHR language helped improve safety at their board meetings? Seems to have a little bit stronger language than we do, because we want everybody to feel safe.
Right.
And I think some of the things that have been happening at our board meetings, security lapses, people shouldn't be able to approach the dais. People shouldn't bring weapons into the boardroom. So maybe that's another discussion that we need to have.
Yeah, I will absolutely follow up and see
Yeah, I'm just
what we can
curious if their
confirm in terms of their
language, being that
experience.
It seems to be stronger, maybe that helped create some safety.
Thank you, Board Member Lindsay. Appreciate that. addition. And again, anyone who has any changes or ideas for the B policies that we discussed tonight, please forward those to Ms. Burt. All right, thank you. We are going to be moving on to our action items at this point. And action item 5A, Certified and Special Service Providers Performance Pay 301 Plan.
So Dr. Bowman is here if you have any specific questions. I think you heard a very nice summation of the process by the President of the SEA earlier this evening.
Are there any questions for Dr. Bowman on the 301 plan, performance plan? Board Member Beckman?
First, I'm so grateful to see it expanded to beyond just certified, and so grateful for that. But the question I have is it still, I can't speak tonight, is it still 2 payouts? And if so, when are they being paid?
Yeah, there will still be 2 payouts. I believe the first one we're shooting for August, and that would be 60% of the approximate $3,000.
Okay.
And then the other one will be October or November, and that's related to still using the school grade. So as we were able to do the last 2 years, we were able to get it all in the summertime, in that first middle of August because of COVID. And now we're going back to that schedule that we had before COVID. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Vice President Hartwells?
Could you just clarify for the community what the impact of not receiving the aggregate expenditure limit waiver will do to this proposal of earned performance pay?
I'm going to defer to Shannon on that one. That's easy for me.
So I think that I want to just repeat what I thought I heard the question being is, if the aggregate spending limit didn't pass, what it would do to this proposal. It wouldn't change this part of it. We would still continue with the funds that we've received for 301 monies and paying those out. So the monies that we would be cutting from our budget would be coming from M&O. The monies that we would be cutting would come from M&O, so it wouldn't impact this at all.
Can I clarify? So does that mean that the employees will be getting the 301 fund second portion that they were promised?
Yes.
Okay, good to know. Any other questions? I would like to comment too that I was really happy to see that there are more eligible certified staff that qualify for this. I think Scottsdale Schools is a leader in this, so I suggest we continue to do that and include as many as we can because we know our employees are working all are working hard. Appreciate that.
Thank you. And I would like to do a shout out to Becky Williams and to Amy Goff specifically, and also to Veronica and Bob Elkari. As everybody worked in, really, we talk about that collaborative effort. It was a true collaboration, and then to get 87% of our eligible staff to approve this is just a great testament to that collaborative effort that we're seeing district-wide. So a huge thanks to everybody and all the other members who helped us get to that finish line. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bowman. Since this is an action item, I am going to ask for input on a motion to approve this action item 5A. Board Member Greenberg? First, is there?
I move, apologies. Are you asking for a motion to be
Yes,
made?
please.
I move to approve action item 5A, Certified and Special Service Providers Performance Pay 301 Plan as presented.
Second.
And there's a second from Vice President Hartwells. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 5-0. And moving on to 5B, authorization of expenditure, Keeve Elementary for playground equipment and installation to Dave Bang and Associates Incorporated.
We have no formal presentations tonight, but Mr. Rayler is here to speak to any questions on 5B through 5E this evening.
Want to take them all at once?
Bring it on.
Well, let's start with 5B. It is an action item. Are there any questions? Yes, Board Member Lindsay.
Not really about this, but on the Keeve playground, are you saving that original piece of equipment?
There's actually 2 pieces of equipment that we'll be saving, but we're going to relocate them to another location.
Okay. Just pretty neat to have original playground equipment from the school.
From 1950.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
a Caterpillar.
Caterpillar. Yeah, that one will be reinstalled.
Very cool. Any other questions? No, with that, since this is an action item, do I have a motion to approve action item 5B?
So moved.
Moved by Board Member Greenberg. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Board Member Beckman. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. On to action item 5C, authorization of expenditure, Interstate Mechanical Corporation, IMCOR, for emergency repairs to Desert Mountain High School water main break. Any questions for Mr. Rayler? Vice President Hartwells?
Thank you, President Sinowski. I would just like a summary of how extensive this damage is, and if we think this is going to be the fix, or is this a process?
Good question, Vice President Hartwells. This particular problem is fixed. I do fear that Desert Mountain is going to need some very serious attention in the coming years. We've actually had 4 different water issues at Desert Mountain in the last 16 months. 2 of them were fire line related. Another was, and 2 others were water main related. So rocky soil up in that neck of the woods, and we are just seeing failures at a rate, and maybe this was just an unlucky year, but it's concerning to me. And so I've not experienced a time when we've had to repipe a school, and one like Desert Mountain could be pretty scary from a cost standpoint. But we are tracking everything real closely. This particular break was a 45-degree elbow under the foundation or the footing of a 24-foot tall retaining wall. So a little bit of settling, pushing on that. We're going to have to pay very close attention.
Is there a process or an analysis that you could undertake, or your team or a contractor could, for prevention, an analysis, an assessment, so we can understand the full scope? Because I'd imagine that much water damage in 16 months here and there, there may be secondary issues. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, there are some things that we can do, some testing that we can do. Recently, we tested the boiler water lines to investigate how bad they were. We have metal pipes, we have plastic pipes, we have all kinds of pipes, and from the pictures that I sent you, you saw that there was an array of pipes just in that area that we were digging. So there are some tests that we can do, and we'll start looking into that, because I do fear, and I've talked to Dr. Menzel about it, that Desert Mountain is going to really need some attention in the coming years.
Thank you, Mr. Rayler.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from other board members? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve item 5C, authorization of expenditure Interstate Mechanical Corp. for emergency repairs at Desert Mountain High School water main break?
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Hartwells. Is there a second?
Second.
And Board Member Greenberg seconds. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes 5-0. On to 5D, authorization of expenditures to our high school roof replacement project to Progressive Roofing Company Incorporated. Any questions for Mr. Rayler at this time on this particular action item?
If I could just make a comment real quick.
Yes, please, yeah.
The roofing industry, like many of our construction industry partners, this particular roof product that we are going to be putting on, I spoke to the contractor this afternoon just to make sure that I wouldn't be lying to you, was 2 months ago, was 12 months out to get it, lead time of 12 months. Lead times have improved, but we're still looking at, on the good side, 4 months, on the less good side, 6 months. So our timeliness of this, bringing it to the board now, there's a good chance that we can get it done over the summer break before the monsoon gets us. So that roof is very problematic, and it's important for people to know that the work that we're doing right now, a lot of times it just can't happen today because we just can't get the products fast enough.
Thank you, Mr. Rayler. And I will note that this is also part of the 2016 bond projects that were proposed and voted for approval by our
Correct.
electorate. Thank you. Yes?
Just quickly, Mr. Rayler, so you did mention in your summary that this is a piece and that you're aware that there are larger issues.
Correct.
And because this is a part of the 2016 bond issuance, and it is taking a longer lead time to get these repairs done, do we, and I'm sorry if I missed this, do you have any indication of when, for instance, like the auditorium, the other areas that have roofing issues will be looked at or fixed?
So you remember Coronado?
Yes.
And the work that we did there, that we had to take the solar off. We planted it in the parking lots. We have that same problem at Saguaro, at Chaparral. So the bond monies that were set aside for roofs really didn't take into account doing something else with the solar. They took into account basically re-roofing while the solar was on there. We've seen great success at Coronado. We believe that Coronado was a warranty issue, but was also partially because of the solar and its reflection on the roof. So I don't want to go up there, spend the bond money on the roofs, and then not get the product that we deserve. And so I'm working through the School Facilities Board to help us fund some of these things that they might typically fund and offset those costs so that we can bring that solar down and create some shade for some parking and not have this long-term problem with solar on our roofs.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I ask for a motion to approve 5D. Board Member Greenberg.
I move to approve action item 5D, authorization of expenditure, Saguaro High School roof replacement project to Progressive Roofing Company, Inc.
Thank you. Is there a second? Vice President Hartwells provides a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. On to action item 5E, authorization of expenditure, Keeve Elementary School playground shade structure replacement and installation with Shade Innet of Arizona. Again, another 2016 bond project. Any questions for Mr. Rayler on this particular item? Mr. Rayler, did you have anything to add?
Like everything, it takes a while to get it, so we're bringing this early to make sure that we get the product in time.
Appreciate that. Oh, Board Member Greenberg.
I would just like to add on items 5B and 5E, these are things that the parents have really been asking for at Keeve, and it's taken some time. And I do want to note that Dennis's team went to some pretty big lengths to be able to make playground space available to students so that multiple grade levels could use them. There was restrictions just because of the size and what was going on. So I want to appreciate everything your team did in the interim, as well as everything it is doing now to make sure that our students have a happy and healthy place to have some fun and relax during the school day.
Thank you.
Excellent. Yes. Okay, any more questions Comments? Seeing none. Okay, can I have a motion to approve 5E?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
Moved by Board Member Greenberg, seconded by Vice President Dr. Hartwells. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Rayler. We move on to action item 5F, second read and approval of revisions to policy BA, school board operational goals. Board Member Greenberg.
Thank you. I believe the background information adequately summarizes the issue and solution. I will note a little bit kind of funny, as I was going through the public policy or the policy public comments and regulations of other districts, I would just note that in Fountain Hill's public comment regulation, they reiterate the fact that the governing board's responsibility is to act impartially and vote in the good for the district as a whole. So it is certainly the standard. If there are any comments or questions, I'm happy to answer them as well, but or propose amendments, but I believe that this adequately addresses.
Vice President Dr. Hartwells.
Thank you, President Sinowski and Board Member Greenberg, for your work again on the B policies. I have a comment and hopefully not heavy editing suggestions to consider. The paragraph that reads individual governing board members agree to act, because this board policy is actually the board, BA is directed to the board and not the individual members, but there is a policy directed to individual board member authority and responsibilities. I would suggest that we remove the language starting from the word individual to and just start that second sentence with, in doing so, have regard amongst other matters to, and then A through E, adding a new F that reads, the impact of the district's financial and asset management decisions on all of the foregoing. And then edit what would be a new G instead of F to be consistent with the approach that the previous provisions, the kind of this cadence of them, to read, instead of the desirability of, put the impact on the district's reputation with respect to high standards of government conduct and academic and extracurricular performance. That's just a little wordsmithing to make it flow with consistency with A through F, and I am requesting an inclusion of a goal that is a fiscal goal, that has fiscal and asset management consideration in it. And then I realize and appreciate that the language that read the board members owe the district the duties of care and loyalty and other such duties is more of a private sector type of board member duty. And since we are volunteers, I'm going to ask that the board consider, and Board Member Greenberg, if you would consider in its place the following. I'm going to read this. At all times, the board as a whole, because again, this board policy is directed to the board as a whole, owes the district the duties established by applicable statute or law, new sentence, as duly elected representatives of the people, the board accepts the responsibility to employ short and long-range strategies that are responsive to the district's needs within the budgetary limitations of the district. That is actually in a sentence that you've proposed to be removed from the original BA in the last paragraph in part, and I am proposing that that be added back in the context that it acknowledges that we are duly elected representatives of the people.
Board
Member Greenberg.
I appreciate this. If I may ask an overarching question, do you have edits of this nature for multiple policies? Because the board was asked to provide these ahead of time, so the understanding was that the board did not have substantive comments to make. If that is not the case, I would ask that that the board vote, I suggest, to table this policy so that those edits can be, rather than, because I don't want to do that during this meeting. We'll be here all night going back and forth and making sure the public can see what the edits are to what's presented online. So would it be fair to say that there are multiple policies then that you have substantive edits to?
Yes.
Board President Sanowski, and perhaps council can help me here, my recommendation would be, so that we do this right and everyone's ideas and concepts can be properly included, I would respectfully ask that perhaps these items, as unfortunate as it would be tabled, or somehow that we move, I guess, we could move straight to adjournment, could we? Or no, we have to?
No, I think we need to go through each agenda item. And then certainly you can take a vote to table the items or not. You can vote, of course, if the revisions are clear, and you can vote to approve or reject as amended, but you have to go through each item and take action on each individual item that is listed on the agenda. You can't just ad hoc say, we're just not going to have this
Okay.
discussion.
Would
Because
that,
the discussion in and of itself is part of the action that
Right.
you're taking.
or,
Go ahead,
no, Vice President
President Hurtwell.
Harbaugh's might have comments.
Yes, okay, thank you. Since we're going to go through each one of them, there are a few of these that I don't have any comments. But there are, where I do have comments, I would say they are substantial. And I appreciate that would probably be better if we all took a look at those and chewed on them over the coming week.
Okay, so in that case, President Sanowski, I would probably, as long as the board's okay with that, move to table action item 5F, second read and approval of revisions to policy BA, school board operational goals.
Second.
There's a movement and a second. All in favor of tabling 5F, second read and approval of revisions to policy BA, please state aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to tabling? The item passes 5-0. We are tabling 5F. Let's move on to 5G then. Second read and approval of revisions to policy BBA, board powers and responsibilities. Board Member Greenberg.
Same position as before, the background documents state it, but if there are substantive revisions proposed, I would propose that we table this item as well. I don't know if there are.
Vice President Hurtwell.
My revisions to BBA, acceptance of the revisions as submitted to BBA are contingent on revisions to BBAA. So in the interest of time and efficiency so that folks can read those in concert, would agree that it might be best to table both BBA and BBAA, given the amount of edits I am requesting for consideration to BBAA.
So the request has been made to table 5G, second read and approval of revisions to policy BBA.
Correct. So I move to table action item 5G, second read and approval of revisions to policy BBA, board powers and responsibilities.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Hurtwells. All in favor of tabling 5G, say aye.
Aye.
Also, the table passes then, 5G passes 5-0. Moving on to action item 5H, second read and approval of revisions to policy BBAA, board member authority and responsibilities. Board Member Greenberg.
Same status as before. This is a pretty minor revision in that we're simply moving one portion of policy BBAA to a new policy BCC and making the process more clear for how for how requests for information lasting 2 hours or longer will be approved by the board. well, BBAA.
BBAA right now.
Sorry, I was just noting that that BCC is right, part of the change, correct.
Any comments on this? Questions? No? Okay. Is there are we still standing by the request to table BBAA? No? Okay.
Each action item must have a motion,
Yep,
a second, and an action.
Okay.
correct.
Well,
Member Greenberg?
if this is this all right, I move to approve.
Oh,
ac-
no.
Oh, no?
Sorry, BBAA?
Correct.
May we table BBAA, please?
Okay. I move to table action item, sorry, council.
So it is Vice President Hartwell's motion then? Did you finish your motion, Board Member Greenberg?
No, you
So
started
there's
speaking.
no
in-
motion on the table. I believe perhaps Board Member Hartwell has a motion to propose.
I move to table the second read and approval of revisions to policy BBAA, board member authority and responsibilities.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Board Member Greenberg. All in favor of tabling 5H BBAA, second read, and approval of revisions, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope. The 5H passes 5-0 to table BBAA revisions. Moving on to 5I, second read and approval of adoption of policy BCC, requests for information. Board Member Greenberg.
Same position as before. This just creates a more clear process for how requests for information lasting 2 hours or longer will be dealt with.
Board Member Hartwell.
I just had a request of Dr. Menzel, if you could comment on the provision to place the action item on the next scheduled regular governing meeting with the board's discussion. I'd just like your thoughts on that. I have no revisions to this to propose.
You have none, did you say?
I have none, but I would like Dr. Menzel, if he could comment, please.
Thank you for the question. If you consider the policy that's currently in place, it requires governing board action for any requests for research over 2 hours. That has not been our practice. So I think the change here allows for discretion. If the request is deemed reasonable and we proceed with it, then there's no need for board action. But if the superintendent decides that that's going to take an inordinate amount of time, it seems reasonable to put it on agenda for consideration. So I have no problem with what's proposed. We'll see how it works in practice, and if it needed to be tweaked, we could tweak it. But I think this is a reasonable attempt to address what's not been working in current policy.
Thank you.
Any other comments from board members? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the second read and approval of adoption of policy BCC, requests for information?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That action item 5I passes 5-0. Moving on to action 5J, second read and approval to revisions policy BDE, board committees. Board Member Greenberg?
Same, the background information, I believe, explains the situation. But in essence, currently, we do not permit standing committees, and we do permit advisory committees that only serve a temporary time in policy BDF. The suggestion is to take most of the language from BDF and move it to BDE because it is pretty good language. It clearly sets out the requirement that the committee follow open meeting law, and is essentially how our audit committee is functioning now. So this is a change that's necessary, and perhaps it would allow us to form a policy committee that would deal with some of the procedural issues here. So I think I highly recommend we adopt this.
Thank you, Board Member Greenberg. Vice President Dr. Hartwells?
Thank you. I have just a few requests to clarifying in this particular board policy. And I also note the necessity of this board policy, given we all passed policy D, the audit committee policy, so we do need to reconcile this guy. However, I would like to propose that the phrase evidence-based is inserted before the word research in the second sentence. And I would like to propose the addition of the following two sentences. The formation of a committee does not explicitly or implicitly authorize or appropriate any budget to the committee, followed by a statement that the board may, by majority vote, dissolve any committee formed hereunder. And that is to ensure that the advisory committee has a way to unwind. I further would like to add a sentence at the end of the paragraph, say board committee charter, that is a clarifying statement only, that for clarity, the charter shall not authorize any budget for itself or its recommendations. I'm not married to the wording, but the spirit here is that it's clear that there is no budget authority granted to the advisory committee. And whether that needs to be in the stated separately or somewhere else, I will defer to council. But I would like us to consider those inclusions, please.
I would ask for the sake of transparency with our public, so that they know what the policy that we're actually voting on is, that we table this item then, so that we can incorporate those changes and clarify those matters for the public. I don't have any issue with those clarifying statements, since they are, well, they're the truth. So, fine by me. So, yes, thank you, President Sanowski and Vice President Hartwells.
Was that a motion?
Sure. I move to table action item 5J, second reading and approval of revisions to policy BDE, board committees.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Vice President Hartwells provides a second to that table. All in favor of tabling the second reading and approval of revisions to policy BDE, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion to table 5J, second read and approval of revisions to policy BDE, passes 5-0. Moving on to action item 5K, second read and removal of policy BDF, advisory committees.
We don't have any advisory committees in place at this time, and I think it's fine to approve its removal from our policy, unless there's a reason that council believes that should not be done, or a board member would not like to do that.
Any questions or comments from board members on this? Nope. Nope. Okay, I would like to ask for a motion to approve 5K, second read and removal of policy BDF, advisory committees.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Hartwells. All in favor to remove BDF, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion passes 5-0. On to action item 5L, second read and approval of revisions to policy BEDB, agenda.
Same position as before. I think the changes are broadly in line. As you'll recall, Board President Sanowski, we have had a number of discussions during agenda setting items about the need for certain flexibility, and I note that tonight's meeting actually did not adhere to this policy either, because we had an item 3 special presentation on the MLK Voices student MCs. Technically, under this policy, we could not have that. So we don't follow this policy, broadly speaking, and I think the request has been made on several occasions to add flexibility. So same background as before.
Do any governing board members have any questions or comments to this? Board Member Lindsay.
Just if Dr. Menzel wants to weigh in on any of these.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The one that I do think we need a change to this policy, so my question is, to your point about tonight's meeting, months ago when I first got here, we had superintendent comments on both special meeting agendas as well as regular meeting agendas. In looking at other districts, they have language for special meetings that includes announcements at the end of that, something that would allow us to say something like, this is National Counselors Week, and we want to celebrate our counselors, something that's not on our agenda, but something that would be appropriate to celebrate. So I want to make sure that the changes were proposed don't tie us in still to just those agenda topics and only authorize us to reorder them versus deciding, for example, on a special meeting, the way it's still written here says, call to order, pledge of allegiance, roll call, approve agenda, and item E, the specific agenda items. Would it allow us to, if there were a reason to have superintendent comments because there were a topic of interest, not for action by the governing board, but timely in terms of providing report, could we add it under the proposed changes, or do we need to tweak that language?
I think I apologize for that oversight. Yeah, I think we can certainly tweak the language, and if there's another district that you've seen language that was very useful to accomplish the same goal, I'm happy to review that and put that in for a second and final read at our next board meeting. Again, just for transparency for our public, I would err on not approving something tonight where the edits are not very clear and written out.
Board Member Beckman?
So I guess I want to make sure I understood. Are you suggesting that the language make it clear or not, that the structure stays the same, only the ability to have flexibility to change the order is what will be written in? Or is the ability to remove items or add items also going to be written in?
So essentially, I don't object to the way the structure is for the regular meeting. And that would be really just about reordering in order to make sure that we're operating efficiently as possible. There could be a time where we didn't have item E, for example. Typically we would, but in the summer, we might not have an agenda item there. We could have it and then just say nothing to report, or you could just not put it in the agenda. I think that's contemplated under the proposed revision. I'm more concerned about the special meeting structure, which seems really limiting for some of those things. And the district that I looked at earlier today just had an announcement section. And to me, an announcement section on a special meeting would be adequate. It wouldn't have to be superintendent's comments. And there may be a time where you don't need it, but if you have an announcements and there are no announcements, that's easy enough to move forward with. But if we've convened this way in a public forum, being able to make an announcement, like was mentioned earlier with the mental health fair tomorrow, I just think those things make it clearer, and I think the goal is to allow us to reorder. And if we're going to be specific about what agenda topics are permitted, let's not unnecessarily constrain what those might be for a special meeting.
Right, so I believe Superintendent Menzel's point is currently as written, you can rearrange, or you could remove superintendent's comments, students and staff recognition, but you can't add an item in, which is an oversight on my part. And again, just for the public, just because a question was raised, these are about changes when the board is developing, the board president and superintendent are developing the agenda. These are not changes that occur once the meeting is noticed. Those have to be taken in the meeting. So, the idea that people show up for the meeting and then we just remove public comment isn't possible. That isn't what that isn't the flexibility that's needed here. The flexibility that's needed here is simply that we don't actually do this. And in times we need to add stuff or remove stuff, so.
But
Member Beckman?
respectfully, in the agenda setting meeting with this policy, the president could say, next meeting, we're not going to have public comment.
Yeah, in theory.
Okay, that's.
Board Member Greenberg, are you going to make a motion to table this item?
I will. I move to table action item 5. What is this
L.
policy? 5L, second reading and approval of revisions to policy BEDB agenda.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Vice President Hartwells. All in favor of tabling 5L, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes to table 5L, second read and approval to revisions to policy BEDB, passes 5-0. Moving on to action item 5M.
Yes, second read, policy BEDBA. This is just to clarify, the current policy states that if a board member comes to the superintendent 5 days, at least 5 working days prior to a board meeting, they can force an item onto the agenda. We don't do that in practice. Actually, the process, the proposal that's been put out here is a bit more structured. It gives the president and superintendent the flexibility needed to say, yes, we'll put this on the agenda, but more information is needed. So the board member has the guarantee it will be on the agenda, assuming it can't be resolved outside the meeting, which is contemplated here, obviously. The board member can withdraw the request. But at the same time, the flexibility needed, and in fact, that's how the policy was brought forward. This is how the suicide awareness and suicide actions were brought forward. These were presented within the 5 working days, but because additional information was needed and changes were made, they were delayed. That's just the natural process of things. So I think it gives the guarantee that the board member needs, but also the flexibility that the governing board as a whole needs to properly agendize items.
At this point, Board Member Beckman.
For consideration, or maybe you can answer it now, Lori or Dr. Menzel, or even with your intent. A question has come up about how are we dealing with the end of the meeting future agenda items when a board member specifically says, I would like to see on a future agenda X, Y, and Z. And those usually, a lot of times, just have over the years gone into just a black hole. Are we considering those actual requests, firm requests by a board member, or that we are going to either respond from an administrative board president standpoint and say, we heard you and your requests, and you can expect X on this agenda or not for this reason?
Board Member Beckman, I recognize and honor what you're saying. Dr. Menzel, would you like to add to this particular comment?
So the general approach is that when we have future agenda topics identified at the end of the regular meeting, that we look for when those may be added. However, sometimes the request is, I would like an update on. And if the update can be provided in written format to the board and it doesn't require any action, it's an information piece, then it hasn't always made its way to an agenda because the intent was to provide governing board members with the update. So having some clarity around whether or not the request is just for the information, regardless of format, or if the specific desire is to have it on an agenda, whether it's information discussion or action, I think that clarity would be important.
Board Member Beckman?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I would just like to add the contemplation is that those are not included. The added language requires that the request be submitted in writing to the superintendent. So it's not something, and obviously it's just, I did not contemplate that. The reason I did not contemplate it is precisely for the reasons that the superintendent stated. And it's also quite common that these matters are often resolved in meetings, either with the individual board member or in information shared with the whole board. So this was really in the case that a board member, has requested an item, has asked for the item, there's no update been provided, whatever, and they say, I really want this on the agenda. I think the board needs to discuss it. And
So I understand this is more of the formal process. I would ask for further discussion at some point, how we firm up that, because it's really just disingenuous if it is a line item called future agenda items, and then it just sits there hanging on, like nothing is typically formally done with it. Then it becomes just a vague statement or a public show of what you're thinking.
Sure.
So-
Board Member Greenberg?
I would agree, and I think the in writing is an important part there, because if we create a system, a spreadsheet, what have you, where people can input their specific requests, we could keep track of it much better than we do now. Now it's up to us to just write things down. I hope, I've generally seen board presidents and the superintendents try to put these items on the agenda in good faith or address them outside. And I know that Board President Sanowski takes very good notes, and as does the Superintendent Menzel, on what future items are requested, and so, but there was nothing ever, it's hard when you're at a board meeting and it's 8 o'clock at night or whatever, and someone's talking about, I want this, I want that. It's not as easy as I submitted this in writing, it's recorded, this is, what I'm looking for, blah, blah, blah. So.
Appreciate that comment. Dr. Menzel, did you want to add anything else to this?
I just want to ask clarification, the 45 days, are those calendar days or working days?
We can take this one to the Supreme Court. That was a case actually recently in our Arizona Supreme Court. What is the definition of a day? I anticipated 45 regular just days, but if you want to make it working days, we can make it working days, and that would probably cover about 4 meetings in that case.
I was only worried about, the 45 days doesn't seem unreasonable until you get to the summertime and
Right.
then the clock ticks differently.
We could approve it with the amendment that'd be 45 working days. Would that be an appropriate, to approve it with the amendment stating that it is no later than 45 working days or business days?
Vice President Dr. Hurtwells?
I have no issue with that proposal. I just would like to point out the last sentence of the first paragraph under regular meetings, I believe, is missing a verb. At least when I printed it out, it was.
The last sentence, the agenda.
Does it say may? It doesn't. May we insert the verb
Oh.
may before the word
Yes.
withdraw? Thank you.
All right, are we okay with those changes, working days and the insertion of the word may? Then I will move to approve action item 5M, second read and approval revisions to policy BEDBA, agenda preparation dissemination with the following amendments. The insertion of the word working in the sentence no later than 45 working days from the date of the request, and the insertion of the word may to read the board member may withdraw the request at any time.
Do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Hurtwells. All in favor of amending or approving as amended the second read and approval of revisions to policy BEDBA, agenda preparation and dissemination, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
The motion passes 4-1. Moving on to action item 5N, second read and approval of revisions to policy BEDD, rules of order.
This is a very minor change I thought was worth adding, that the board president can implement additional rules of order. Again, these are rules of order imposed on the board, not on the public. And this again comes from, Robert's Rules of Order, as antiquated as it might be in some cases, but our rules of order are very vague, I find. And if the board president would like to speed things up by only allowing someone to speak once on the topic, that is a standard rule of order, and other rules of order may be implemented in that nature.
Board Member Hartwells?
Yes, thank you, President Zanowski. On the merits, the addition of the language, I will circle back to my original kind of blanket concerns that the board, by majority vote, could make those kinds of considerations. I appreciate the intent is to give the president some flexibility to ensure some efficiency in a kind of a game day situation. But I also kind of look at it from a different perspective, or in a 360 perspective, that there's a lot of breadth in the paragraph as written, and so I would like if we could consider tabling this one for a little more discussion. I'd very much like to hear other board members' comments on that, but that's my preference. I also would request that we add the language about presentations of unsolicited commercial services not being permitted, which has already gone through 2 reads.
Board Member
As new.
Hartwells, are you suggesting that that would be added? We would table this and then you would add, we would want added that information about unsolicited?
Yes, I am.
Understood.
But I would very much like to hear my colleagues' thoughts on this.
Any comments? I would like to make one. I think it's really important to be able to make orderly and efficient operations of our meetings something that is a priority, the work that we do. So I appreciate the addition of F in there. And then also the addition of the unsolicited, because we did talk about that previously.
Yeah, I believe we voted that down on the basis that we were going to be reviewing BEDD again. With no further comments, then I will move to table action item 5N, second read and approval of revisions to policy BEDD, rules of order.
Thank you, Board Member Greenberg. Is there a second to that table request?
Second.
Dr. Hartwells seconds that table request. All in favor of tabling 5N, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0 to table action 5N, second read and approval of revisions to policy BEDD. With that, we finish our action items. We move on to adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor to adjourn this meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned at 8:41 PM.